To begin with the beginning, I wanted to ask you if you can tell me about your epiphany, how it all started, how you got into cinema.
When I was a kid, there was no television yet when I grew up, so I inherited a little projector from my father. 9.5 millimeter projector, it's an obsolete format now. It's a pre-war amateur format. And my father, from his old childhood, over the war, had sort of saved this little projector, little thing, hand-rolled, and a dozen little films. Laurel and Hardy and Buster Keaton and some early animation. 1 minute little reels, tiny little things. And it was in the early 50s. There was no television. Cinema was a very rare pleasure. So I became the projectionist for my friend. I showed my 12 movies at every birthday party, forward and backward and fast forward and fast backwards. And I realized how much fun it is to show movies to people. I was a child projectionist.
And as part of this room here where we do this polyphony of interviews, one of the agendas is also to have a protest against forgetting and to talk about practitioners or artists or filmmakers and architects from the past who might inspire practices today. So I was wondering if you can tell me about who are your heroes in cinema. I know that Ozu is very much in the center, but if you could talk about him and maybe some others.
Well, I have some heroes in painting, and they predate my cinema heroes because I probably learn more from painting than from cinema. I learn more from painting about framing, about storytelling. And my heroes are, above all, Vermeer and Rembrandt, the Dutch painters, really. And I think I learned everything that I needed to know about cinema from the history of paintings, much more than from the history of cinema. My hero filmmakers are, of course, my great master, Yasujiro Ozu. Some of the great German filmmakers who I only discovered when I was already making movies, because I was cut off from, my generation, we were cut off from the generation of the Murnaus and Fritz Langs. We had no fathers, and we were not in touch with the grandfathers, so to speak. So those I discovered much later, and my heroes were American filmmakers. John Ford and Nicholas Ray, Samuel Fuller. Those were my real heroes, the rebels in Hollywood.
And can we talk a little bit more about painting? Because this morning we spoke to Frank Gehry, and he told me that basically his whole inspiration came from painting. Whole inspiration for architecture came from painting. So it's very interesting that you as a filmmaker say that it also comes from painting. I think Hopper was also important.
Sorry?
Also Hopper was an important influence.
Yes, I learned a lot from painting. It's so much about when you first set up your camera, when you do that for the very first time, a photo camera or film camera, it doesn't matter really. It's so much about a knowledge of framing or a feeling for framing, because you realize more important than what's inside the frame is what you leave out. Because what you leave out will never be seen again, which is a huge responsibility. So framing is a very moral act each time you set up a camera. And I learned about framing from admiring paintings and from already as a child going to Amsterdam on every free time I had on the train or by bicycle. I only lived 4 or 5 hours away by bicycle on the German side of the border. So I could go to the Rijksmuseum, I could see Van Gogh's, I could see near all the Dutch landscape paintings. And when I was a boy, everything was clear. I really wanted to be a painter. I never thought about photography or filmmaking. I learned about these much later, but even then, when I was setting up my camera for the first time, or my film camera, the frames I had deep in my brain were determined by landscapes I'd seen, and they were painted landscapes.
Going through many of your interviews, one thing which comes up very regularly is Caspar David Friedrich. You say that Caspar David Friedrich totally inspired your youth.
Yeah. It's of course entirely and utterly romantic, and in a strange way I also always considered Edward Hopper utterly romantic. And it was probably very romantic to paint cityscapes and lonely people in the city at the time when he was painting them, when everybody else was when Pollock was painting at the same time, and when everybody had gone to abstract painting, and then still to clinging to painting houses and horizons and people in windows was probably also utterly romantic. And those are the painters I really learned everything from, about also storytelling. My first movie, Summer in the City, was called after a painting by the same title by Edward Hopper. Everybody thinks I called it after a Loving Spoonful song, but it's really a painting by Edward Hopper.